the way that I have explained this in the past is that when we do these power rankings, it's based on who we think would win in a neutral site matchup, say in the playoff. That's the whole scope of this conversation. I think knowing now that Seth McLaughlin is down for the rest of the season with the torn Achilles, it's brutal news. I broke down his film as a prospect, and he was already my highest rated center, and I think could end up being my top center in the 2025 NFL draft. So losing the anchor of your offensive line after already losing your left tackle is going to be very, very concerning and problematic going forward for this Ohio State offensive line. I'm quite worried about how they're going to play, maybe not against Indiana, but in the playoff and in the Big Ten championship game when they have to square up with Oregon's strong defensive line. And more specifically, as we're painting this picture of if Ole Miss and Ohio State faced off, I don't think that I can honestly trust them to handle Ole Miss's front seven. Ole Miss's front seven has been dominant. We saw what they did against Georgia. So my concern for the injuries comes out here in the way that I'm ranking Ole Miss where I put them.
So I do think Seth McLaughlin injury is a big deal. So Mike Detillier, who you've been on with before out of New Orleans in WWL, is the big New Orleans station here radio-wise. Love Mike D, and shout out to him and Bobby. But when Seth McLaughlin went down, I thought about the stat that he always brings up. Joe, do you know that teams are likely to lose 65% to 70% of the time when a starting center goes down in the season? So it's interesting because it's Ohio State, not even against Indiana, but long-term, how much does this affect them? The problem that I have with this is twofold. Number one, I feel like power rankings also has a large part of it in being injuries do play a part in this. Don't get me wrong. But a lot of this goes on to what you have built up to the season already. And if I'm splitting hairs, the last time I saw Ohio State have, just for what it's worth, O-line injuries, they had so much depth. Now, center's a massive issue, and I'll talk about that in just a moment with him. I saw them go up against a Penn State team and do what they needed to do to win. Okay? When Ole Miss had injuries, they lost to Kentucky and LSU. So if I'm going to split hairs here, I love Ole Miss at 2. I love it. At the same time, I think a little bit of the resume here for Ole Miss is why I just cannot put them above Ohio State for a moment. Now,
okay. Well, just to push back on that slightly, I understand what you're saying, but this was before they lost their starting center. And this is one of the talking points.
Well, I was going to get there next.
Okay, so I'm just throwing this in there. This is also a talking point that not only we had on this show, but other national shows that I've listened to have talked about, that Ohio State doesn't have the depth that you would hope for a program of this caliber, because
not many teams have that quality of depth, if we're being honest.
That's what I was getting to, is that in the modern era of the transfer portal, it is impossible to be able to deal with 2 offensive line injuries and to not see a step backward. This might be completely debunked this week. We might see that offensive line be high flying and play really well against Indiana and not miss a bump. And I might change my mind and move them back up to 2. But at the current moment, reacting to the news, I think that is significant for what you just brought up. It is a very critical, and you being a former college center, you know that the importance of having your center who's experienced.
So let me talk about this for a minute, because I talked about something on Monday. I'm not as massively confident anymore in what I talked about Monday, Ohio State versus Indiana. And I want to get it out there. All right, let's talk about the center position for just a moment. Okay. So there's a massive issue here, okay? The number one issue is snaps. Okay, do you have somebody that can simply snap the football? How much of the cadence has a backup center done with the first-team quarterback? A second-team quarterback's cadence is different, and your rhythm is different. How you sit back on your heels is different.
These are all such good points that the average football fan doesn't even think about. These are all very good points. Sorry. Continue.
Okay, thank you. Well, it's like I played the position for 3.5 years. So when I look at this, I'm interested to see how that plays out early. It's just, again, I'm not going to fight over semantics with you. You're right. I agree with you. If they faced off with one another, and especially with the center going down, I would honestly probably take Ole Miss here because of their D-line. The problem is what Ole Miss is going to show up eventually. Is it the one that's trending, or is it the one that's going to revert back to the beginning of the season? Now, Trey Harris is coming back. How does I know this is going to sound stupid. How explosive is their offense? Because when he's been out is when the explosion started, right? Like when they weren't trying to force him to football, they exploded offensively, and I'm like, what the hell?
Right? They were a little more steady. It felt like, and
Jackson Dart didn't feel like he had to go to him every drive and every play, and it benefited him. So I'm with you. I don't hate it here. All right. I know you probably want to get to Notre Dame and my South Carolina take here, so let's go ahead and rip the Band-Aid off.
BetOnline remains your top spot for all of your live betting action and contests. NFL, college football, UFC, NHL are all in full swing. BetOnline is your number one source for wagering news, odds, trends, and predictions with both desktop and mobile access at any time. Head to BetOnline today and use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for 50% off your first deposit. That is a 50% welcome bonus. BetOnline, where the game starts.